All right, we can go ahead and get started. So, hello everyone. My name is Ricardo Pacheco. I am a Senior Legislative Affairs Associate with the CPC Center, and I will be moderating, a great conversation today. Before we start, I have three brief housekeeping notes. First, I want to say thank you to our wonderful interpreter, Elena. We have live Spanish interpretation available for anyone who needs it. To turn it on, navigate to the bottom of the screen and click the interpretation button with the globe icon and select Spanish. To hear the interpreted language only, click mute original audio. So en Spanish, gracias a nuestro intérprete Elena, tenemos interpretación en español si alguien la necesita. Para acceder a la interpretación, haga clic abajo en interpretación con la imagen del globo y selecciona español. Para escuchar solamente al intérprete, haga clic en mute original audio. So again, that was our first housekeeping note. There's a few more. Our second note is we are going to dig deep into policy discussions today, but we will not engage. Again, we are not going to be engaging in electoral or partisan conversations during the session. Our third note, we've also enabled automatic closed captioning. To turn them on, go to the meeting controls toolbar at the bottom of your screen and click captions and then show captions. This is AI, ironic, so it is often imperfect. So we'll also be adding improved captions before we send a video of this event to you later this week. And fourth, if your on-screen name is event participant, please rename yourself and make sure you register with the registration link. That way you can actually get all of the great follow-up materials that we're going to be sending out after the webinar. And lastly, we encourage you all to ask questions of our incredible panelists throughout this event. You can drop your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. So let's get started. Over the past year, we've seen a lot of reporting, congressional attention, and a lot of research on AI and its implications for the different aspects of our lives, from our privacy to security to our democracy and so on, all of which are vitally important. Today, though, we're going to hone in on one specific aspect of AI, and that is what it means for workers. What consequences does AI have for workers' safety, for workers' privacy, and for their rights? What does AI mean for employer power? And how does it affect the broader economy in which we all work? Our discussion is also going to address the essential questions of how best to protect workers from the negative impacts that AI may introduce in the workplace, to what our movement needs to help change the narrative. What policy measures can we implement to mitigate potential harms? Importantly, we are going to explore how fundamental worker protections, such as the right to organize and collectively bargain, play a critical role in this new technological context. So we intend to dive deep into these issues, drawing on insights from our panelists, as well as contributions, again, from you, our audience. Our aim is to leave today's conversation with a clearer understanding of AI's impacts on workers and how it may affect them in the future, and strategies for protecting workers today and onward. Now, we know that the labor movement is tremendously diverse. In fact, that's one of its greatest strengths. This means, though, that we must not consider it a monolith when it comes to perspectives on these issues, or any other for that matter. Different unions will have different views and policy preferences when it comes to AI, and I hope that we'll hear some of those perspectives during our audience Q&A. We're also very, very fortunate to have folks on our panel today to share more about how one union is thinking about this topic. So with that, let's go ahead and introduce our distinguished panelists, each bringing a rich depth of knowledge and experience to our conversation today. So our first panelist, Ben Zipperer, joined the Economic Policy Institute in 2016. His areas of expertise include the minimum wage, inequality, low-wage labor markets. He has published research in the Quarterly Journal of Economics and the Industrial and Labor Relations Review, and has been quoted in outlets such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, Bloomberg, and the BBC. Thank you, Ben, for being here. Our next panelist, Dan Reynolds, is the Assistant Director of Research for the Communications Workers of America. He's worked for 15 years in labor research at CWA, specializing in bargaining support and analysis on wages and benefits at major employers across telecommunications, airlines, the public sector, and manufacturing industries. Thank you, Dan. And our next panelist is Mike Horace. Mike has a deep-rooted passion for journalism and in particular for public media. He is the radio program and operations manager for WCMU Public Media, the NPR station serving Central and Northern Michigan. Mike was elected president of the NABET CWA Local 54412 in 2017 and was reelected in 2019, 2021, and 2023. He has been actively involved in organizing efforts throughout his career and is a strong advocate for the rights of workers. Thank you, Mike, for joining us. So Ben, let's go ahead and start with you. Thanks for being here. And we're going to start with you so we can help frame our conversation and put it into a historical context. AI isn't the first technological change to affect the workplace. So perhaps you can offer us a broader perspective. What have you found in your research looking at different periods of technological change and the US labor market?
Thank you. Happy to be here. Yes, technological change has been a common feature of modern economies throughout history, whether we're talking about improved textile machinery or advances in computers and software. And while there have always been concerns that technology can be a threat to workers, by and large, technological advances have helped to raise wages and improve living standards by boosting workers' productivity, meaning that technological advances have allowed workers to produce more goods and services in a given amount of work. So even though there's a perennial fear that technology will negatively affect the labor market, technology-based increases in productivity have not caused mass unemployment and they have not caused higher inequality. But on the other hand, the full potential boost to living standards that technology could provide, whether it's AI or something else, that's often been more than swamped by declining worker bargaining power, where employers gain enough power to suppress the wages of typical workers, shifting income away from them and towards business and corporate profits. And that negative shift has been the result of policy decisions like failing to protect workers' rights to organize unions, failing to raise the minimum wage, failing to maintain extended periods of low unemployment. And those intentional policy failures have and continue to be the primary problems in the US labor market and are also the main reasons why technological advances have not lived up to their potential to improve living standards. So it's often not technology in and of itself that's causing major problems in the US labor market. Instead, it's those policy failures that I mentioned, how employers can, that allow employers to exploit technological advances like AI or something else to exert control over workers and redistribute income away from them.
Very interesting, and you mentioned something that I want to follow up on, and that is why hasn't technological change been a driving force causing unemployment and inequality?
That's a great question. So it might help to take a concrete example, like, for example, how AI affects legal assistance. So let's say there's some new advanced software, call it AI, call it whatever, that basically does the job of finding and summarizing relevant legal information. Like if a law firm is considering a particular case, this software helps to find relevant laws, legal decisions. It may even summarize them in some useful or semi-useful way. So in other words, this technology basically does some of the work that a paralegal or a legal assistant might do. Now, on the one hand, this may mean that the law firm is less likely to hire paralegals or maybe pay them less because human paralegals are now less valuable to the employer now that the software can accomplish some of those tasks. So that's bad for those workers. On the other hand, there are a bunch of factors pushing in the opposite direction. With this new technology, the cost of providing legal services falls. And those falling costs increase the demand for legal services among folks who couldn't afford them in the first place, raising demand for paralegals. Moreover, now that legal services are cheaper because of this new technology, some people can spend less money on legal services and spend their extra money on goods and services from other sectors of the economy, generating demand and jobs elsewhere. And finally, it's not really clear that a law firm will automatically substitute AI for paralegals because used in an appropriate way, AI can improve the quality of paralegal work. So instead of substituting for paralegal work, the new technology complements paralegal work, helping the law firm provide a higher quality service. And so in this story, most of the negative aspects of technology are offset by positive ones. And the reasons why go back to having good economic policy, keeping aggregate demand in the economy high enough through adequate fiscal and monetary stimulus, but also ensuring that workers have a say at their workplace to decide how technology is being used, either because the labor market is very tight or because they can bargain through their union to decide how new technologies can be implemented and facilitate their work, capturing some of the gains of those productivity improvements.
Got it. Thank you, Ben. And I want to talk about one other, issue, and that's, job displacement. So we've heard a lot of concern about mass job displacement due to AI, and how that will make workers more vulnerable to exploitation. We've also heard, proponents of AI talk about this as an inevitability. And that workers who want to survive, in this new economy just need to skill up to try to stay ahead of AI in certain sectors. How do you view these concerns?
I think I view most of these concerns as a distraction from the core issue of ensuring workers have enough bargaining power. That is, making sure that we have a very tight labor market where aggregate demand is high, and also making fundamental changes to labor law so that workers can organize and are put on an equal footing when negotiating with employers. I mean, of course, individual workers know best about what skills they need to do their job or pursue their goals. But as a matter of policy, discussions of workers not having enough so called skills, they often tend to blame workers rather than providing them with the voice that they need at their workplace to prevent being exploited by their employers. And frankly, the loudest voices on how workers need to skill up or need more education to compete in today's economy, they often use that as a distraction because they are often the same folks attacking teachers, the same folks attacking progressive taxes to support public education or a better social benefits and welfare system with universal health insurance, subsidized childcare, an adequate retirement system. All of these concrete policies and the others I mentioned would do an enormous amount to level the competitive playing field for US workers and ensure that technological advances lean towards benefiting workers at their workplace.
Ben, thank you so much for that perspective. Um, Dan, we want to move on to you now, to zoom in on how one union is thinking about AI. So first, Dan, how is AI impacting CWA workers broadly?
Well, thank you, Ricardo, and thank you for having me on. So CMA represents members in a broad range of industries, telecom, media, technology, manufacturing, public sector. And across these industries, our members have been seeing new AI tools introduced in their workplaces, performing, what we've come to categorize as management automating kind of tasks and work automating kind of tasks. So work automation tools are maybe more popularly discussed about AI uses in the media. Our local president, Mike Horst, will speak a little bit more later about generative AI tools at our media employers. But we've also seen expanded use of chatbots and more sophisticated voice recognition and response programs, performing customer service tasks at our call centers. Workers organizing with Code CWA in the tech industry have reported increased use of AI tools for software engineering tasks like generating code. But we've also seen management automating AI tools across our workplaces. That is, tools used to support or replace management decision-making on aspects of our members' jobs. So at call centers, new tools transcribe and analyze calls in real time and provide instant feedback to agents and flags to managers on nuanced aspects of customer interactions like tone of voice, the pace of speaking, and adherence to scripts. And you can imagine how popular that is with call center agents being pinged by a computer to be friendlier all day. In a recent survey of 3,000 CWA call center members, a majority of the respondents reported that these tools increased workplace stress and did not make the work more fair, easier, or interesting, and did not improve customer service. Among our telecom technicians, working on the network and in the field and providing service at customers' homes, are similarly being monitored and kept to schedules through real-time tracking of their location through GPS, and increasingly are directed throughout their day by automated routing tools. Organizing workers with CWA at an outsourcing firm who rate AI output for Google are managed by automated systems that evaluate their work product and can automatically lock them out of further work opportunities if the system flags them for any number of issues, such as ratings that are out of line with their colleagues or failing to finish their ratings on time. These systems are enforcing a breakneck workplace. But in addition, members report lots of errors with these AI systems, which can take days or weeks to appeal to humans, leaving members large and unpredictable gaps in their pay. And so, the common thread that ties these varied experiences together across industries is the tendency of employers to invest in tools that seek to automate, de-skill, and speed up the work, trying to squeeze productivity out of skilled professionals by treating them like robots. These systems are often adopted despite concerns about the quality of their output. When the systems serve more supplemental roles in the workplace, high-skilled, members, rarely report that they add value. But when these systems are used to replace or control the work, our members report that mistakes by these systems have negative impacts on their jobs and their ability to serve customers.
Got it, Dan. And there's, one other thing I want to ask about, and that is, I understand that the CWA has set up a national AI committee. Would you tell us how that came to be, and what's the committee's work? And what are the needs of CWA workers? How do we help shape and change the narrative on AI to protect workers and include them in the public policy debate?
Yeah. So our National AI Committee consisted of local officers and rank and file members from across our media, telecom, and technology sectors. It was brought together by our national leadership last summer in response, to the growing use of AI tools across CWA workplaces. The directive on the committee was to establish a set of principles that could help guide CWA's bargaining and advocacy work on AI, and to create recommendations for how the union should address the challenges that these systems pose to our members. The members of the committee came together in an educational process to better understand both ground level impacts of these new systems in the workplace and a broader view of how these systems impact our industries and the economy. The final report by the committee, which was released back in December, encapsulates an empowered vision that the committee members came to after months of speaking with workers, academics, industry experts, and union leaders. Firstly, our committee identified both challenges and opportunities in these systems. So, for example, our national survey of CWA call center members broadly found that AI systems were associated with reduced job quality and stress. However, not all systems were the same. AI systems that supplemented call center agents, for instance, helping them connect to individualized training or helping them locate customer and product information during calls, were less likely to be associated with stress and were reported by a majority to actually improve their ability to provide customer service. This suggests that AI systems can be used to empower workers, augmenting their skills and improving their ability to perform the uniquely human aspects of their job. The committee principles, which were approved by our national leadership, highlight the need for workers to have a voice and input in the development and implementation of these systems to ensure that they are safe, reliable, and used to augment and empower workers to do their jobs instead of controlling and replacing them. What's key to this vision is that frontline workers have unique and valuable insights into their work and are a necessary voice for creating systems that create value. We've already seen instances where employers have adopted and then dropped off-the-shelf AI systems because they failed to generate a return on investment. We believe these tools will ultimately underdeliver on creating value if workers don't have input on the goals these systems are designed to achieve, their development, implementation, and ongoing oversight.
Thank you, Dan. And now I want to talk about, core worker protections. So how can core worker protections, like the right to organize and to bargain collectively, help workers benefit from AI rather than be harmed by it?
Yeah. Collective bargaining is a critical tool for workers to gain a voice in shaping these new tools that will have an impact on their workplaces. Union representation and collective bargaining are critical because it not only gives workers power and leverage to influence how these systems are developed and used, but also gives workers a venue to assert their collective power and bargain for their fair share of the value these systems can produce, whether that's through, increased wages, better benefits, improved or reduced work schedules. Artificial intelligence is not unique. So CWA has a long history of bargaining over new technologies, especially in the telecom industry, where technology have always had a large impact on our work and have been a central issue for bargaining.
Now, I have a quick follow-up for you, Dan. Are there any successful examples of collective bargaining agreements that address AI-related issues?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we are increasingly seeing wins by unions across the country and in industries, bargaining protections against new technologies that eliminate jobs or degrade job quality. At CWA, journalists and print and digital media workers have won new protections against AI, which Mike will discuss in a little more detail shortly. In the telecom industry, we've been focusing on solidifying and extending language that we've won through the decades of bargaining on abusive management tactics using new technologies. So this has included limits on monitoring used for discipline at call centers and protections against, work speed up. Recently in bargaining, we've been focused on extending those kinds of protections to cover the new types of data streams that can be used for AI management systems. So for instance, web cameras for work-at-home members, and grappling with new capabilities that AI can bring to current technologies that were not anticipated under our current bargaining language. So for instance, the ability of AI systems to, for call center workers, go back and analyze months of calls and flag potential issues across those months for managers to cherry pick for the purposes of, discipline. So across our contracts, even when language does not directly address AI specifically, the grievance and arbitration provisions that are commonly used to enforce agreements gives us tools to hold employers accountable. So we've heard from local stewards who say that, when managers have used the output of automated systems as the basis for discipline, we can use the grievance process that are often in our union contracts to force human intervention and oversight, to demand that companies, for instance, in call centers, produce the call recordings that the AI system used as the basis for some kind of flag, and make sure that a human is involved in the evaluation of it and in any decisions that are made from it.
Thanks for that, Dan. And I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about, gender and racial equity. So how is CWA thinking about the potential gender and racial equity impacts of AI for workers?
Yeah, I mean, we have already seen examples of AI systems producing what seem to be discriminatory outcomes among CWA work groups. So for instance, going back to, the call center work, which I'm most familiar with, members of color have expressed frustration about those automated call center feedback systems that I mentioned before. We've heard that those systems, they call it sentiment analysis when they judge a call based on the tone of voice or the friendliness or tone or empathy. Workers we've heard back from workers of color that those systems seem to have biased results for workers that maybe have accents or maybe have different styles of speech than those systems might have been trained on. So this is an area where new structures for transparency and accountability are needed from policymakers and regulators, both on vendors who develop these systems and on employers who adopt them. And really, transparency is key here because the feedback systems that I've mentioned before, those are were clearly visible to call center agents. The outcomes from them were communicated by management. But, it's true that we don't always know, and employers are often, loath to disclose what other kinds of systems are being used to make important decisions in the workplace, and whether there's any audit of the outcome, or whether human judgment has played any role in the decision making they support. So transparency is key, and I'd say that organized and empowered workers can complement policy action on these issues by establishing democratic development and oversight processes and setting guardrails that can prevent discriminatory harms in the first place.
Got it. I want to shift gears, and I think this is going to be my last question for you, Dan. And this is about privacy rights. So we know that AI systems rely on huge amounts of data. How can we ensure that workers' privacy rights are protected in the age of AI?
Yeah. The digitization of the workplace has made our members and really all workers a source of, troves of digital data with the potential to be used by AI systems. So webcams, tablets, computers, GPS trackers, these things are common across lots of work groups and across industries, meaning there's really is an endless ability for workers to be surveilled and tracked by their employers. And this is true off the job as well. There's instances of employers using AI systems to track social media use of workers, to target union leaders and stymie organizing efforts. So protecting workers is going to require, action for policymakers and regulators. There's an example of this recently in the past few years, which is from the National Labor Relations Board, where in 2022, the General Counsel issued a memo identifying the need for new frameworks of enforcement of labor rights that recognize the chilling effect automated surveillance technologies can have on people's rights to join a union. So those kinds of guardrails are needed that require employers to minimize the data they collect and take action to ensure that data is handled responsibly. And again, this is an issue where organized workers can complement policymaking when they are empowered to address issues particular to their workplace. So for instance, our members took on digital data and privacy issues when they bargained transition to work from home roles during the pandemic, establishing contract protections that put limits on how employers could monitor them at their at-home workplaces through web cameras. And so there's really a powerful synergy there when policymakers and organized and empowered workers can tackle these issues.
Dan, thank you so much for all of your insights. We are going to go to Mike next. Mike, thank you for being with us today, and thank you for your patience.
Thank you,
so now that we've heard these broader perspectives about AI's impacts on workers, I'd love to hear from you about what it's meant in your own workplace.
My experience with AI really reflects what is happening throughout the entire media sector. We're seeing it slowly encroaching into our everyday routines, sometimes with the union being involved in the deployment of these technologies, and sometimes not. Video and audio production generates a lot of material, and it's material that has to be cataloged, coded, and transcribed. And the process of generating all this metadata, that's what we call it, it used to be entirely dependent on workers. AI is gradually taking over that work. It can review video and audio and tag subjects and topics and places, etc. It can transcribe all that audio. It can suggest edits. It can tag highlights. It could even automatically generate instant replays, which we are seeing happen in many nationally televised sporting events now. And especially when you get into transcription and coding specific subjects, the accuracy is questionable at best in many cases. A lot of employers in our sector, luckily not mine, but this has cropped up, is they're taking action to digitize things like the voice and the likeness of on-air personnel. So think the people that are presenting your evening newscast or hosting middays on your local radio station. Through the use of what's called personal services contracts. And these are contracts that go above the union contract, the collective bargaining agreement that we negotiate. They're actually getting into the agreements that the employer has the right to your voice, your likeness, your writing style, all of those things that make us each human and make us each unique. Essentially, this would allow employers to digitize an on-air personality, fire that person, and yet keep them on the air for years and years, presenting the news live via AI every single night. So we've been in NABIT and CWA negotiating protections for these innate qualities that are part of all of us, and we have had some success with that. We're also seeing AI creeping into news generation and news reporting itself. We're seeing AI generated stories more and more often, reporting on relatively simple things right now, things like financial summaries of the markets, high school sports scores, weather events, earthquakes. But more and more, we're seeing these are filled with errors, things that would normally be caught by a human editor or a human reporter. We have seen a lot of news outlets experimenting with that kind of AI generation, and a lot of them have actually discontinued using that technology because of the outcry from the public, because of the outcry from their employees, and because it's actually putting their integrity and their reputation as a journalistic outlet on the line. But I know these technologies are constantly improving, new products are constantly coming out, and many, many managers are eagerly looking to these technologies as a way to potentially reduce costs through the elimination of workers.
Wow, that's very interesting, and I'm also interested, this is a follow-up, how would your experience have been different if you weren't unionized?
Yeah, I've been very lucky in my particular workplace because while we have seen the introduction of AI into some of our daily workflows, it's been done in consultation with our union. The technologies have been introduced in a way where they complement human workers, not replace human workers. So in my particular location, we haven't had any staff reductions as a result because our management has taken the view, as has the union, that AI must be complementary, not a replacement for workers. But part of the reason that I'm in this good situation where management's been working with us on this issue is because I work in a nonprofit newsroom. Management is not bound by profits. They're not trying to appease shareholders, but the same can't be said for for-profit newsrooms. In other shops, especially in non-represented shops, this technology has been introduced to create efficiencies and reduce those labor expenses through workforce reductions. And so, that is a issue that all of CWA is looking at closely because these are high paying jobs that are ultimately going away. These are editors, they're graphic designers, they're studio crews, videographers. These are all very skilled people traditionally in higher wage jobs. And the AI is slowly creeping into their workflow as well. And if you're working for a for-profit newsroom, I would be very concerned right now.
Yeah, I want to talk about now the kind of like the dynamics between employers and workers. So, in your experience, has AI shifted the balance of power between employers and workers? And if so, how?
Yeah, throughout NABIT CWA, we have seen a lot of this happening. In my shop, like I said, the shift hasn't been as big because management recognizes that it should be complementary, not a replacement thing. But in many other shops, we've been hearing stories about how that balance has been shifting. One of the ways it happens is through the automation of routine tasks. This means in many cases, fewer employees are needed, leading to layoffs, and that diminishes the overall power of the remaining workers. We're seeing workers being left behind as AI is taking over these routine tasks. Workers who do not adapt to new technologies as quickly are finding themselves being left behind. Often, these employees are not being provided with the training they need and the support that they need to learn new skills, which ultimately leads to them not being retained by the company. We're seeing surveillance, as Dan mentioned previously. So much employee surveillance is being done by AI now, including tracking employees during their workday, looking at things like work performance, productivity, compliance with workplace policies. Are you typing fast enough? Are you progressing through your tasks as quickly as management expects you to? Did you take too long on a phone call or on a bathroom break? Are there too many distractions in your work environment, in the company's opinion? And that's allowing managers to micromanage their employees, ultimately impacting worker autonomy and job satisfaction. And we've also seen it creeping into the collective bargaining process. Some employers are now actually using AI to formulate bargaining strategies or to counteract unionization efforts. Um, Unions likewise have the option of doing the same thing. And we are seeing this with some locals in CWA now, where we're using generative AI to practice negotiation strategies and anticipate how such a negotiation will proceed. But there's a danger point there too, because as you put your negotiating strategy into something like ChatGPT or another AI, you don't know what is going to become of that data. The data is not necessarily protected like it needs to be. So you're running a risk if you use that kind of technology to help with bargaining.
Wow, that is so interesting. The next question I wanna ask though is, is a little bit more about protecting, jobs. So, how can workers' voices be included, in helping to change the narrative on AI? Particularly as we think about protecting, jobs and not replacing jobs with AI. What do workers like you need on the ground?
Yeah, I think one of the big things we need is some guardrails. And something that would certainly help is some clear guidelines about what has to be a subject of mandatory bargaining with the union. Right now, a lot of employers take the opinion that they have to bargain over the effects of AI implementation, but not on the implementation itself. And that is certainly something, if that was mandated, that would certainly help workers and kind of get back a bit of that autonomy that the AI takes away. Workers should also have representation in decision-making bodies within organizations that are governing the use of AI. As I mentioned, we need other guardrails in the media sector in particular, maybe some guardrails relating to the protection of workers' copyrighted materials and those uncopyrightable aspects that make us all human. Again, how we look, how we sound, what our writing style is. I think government can also, at all levels of government, really help direct some investment towards labor augmenting AI systems and lead by example in the procurement process. Because oftentimes government procurement processes serve as a framework and a model for the private sector. And maybe most importantly, employers need to be transparent when it comes to the use of AI, including how these technologies are going to be deployed, the rationale behind their use, and the expected impact on the workforce. Employment decisions, in my view, should never be made solely by an AI system. There needs to be clear expectations when it comes to employment decisions, and there has to be a way to appeal decisions directly to human supervisors who are able to consider mitigating circumstances and make a judgment that is separate from what the AI is doing.
So interesting, Mike. You know, have you and your colleagues been able to address any negative impacts of AI or anticipated ones in your workplace through collective bargaining?
Yeah, we certainly have. My siblings in print journalism with the News Guild CWA have been mobilizing on AI issues and winning improved languages in many of their contracts. We have actually a newly organized group of 300 journalists with a digital publication called Insider, who went on a 13-day strike last summer over issues that included the use of artificial intelligence and how it can be used to erode jobs. Media workers at CWA have also been taking the lead on sector-specific AI committees. So I am actually involved in one for the broadcasting sector. There's a committee for the print journalism sector, and there are other committees being set up all throughout CWA so that we can deal with very industry-specific uses of AI. And we have seen some recent examples of bargaining wins as well when it comes to the Associated Press and also the Real News Network. In particular, with the Associated Press, their new agreement specifically says that AI cannot be used to enable layoffs or for the elimination of positions. So there is certainly some progress being made, but there's a lot of work to do on this front.
Great. I have one last question for you, Mike, before we turn over to our audience questions. Um, and it's again about the National AI Committee. Can you talk about your experience participating in CWA's National AI Committee?
Yeah, absolutely. I found it to be really eye-opening because I've been seeing the impacts in the media sector, talking with NABIT members all around the country, but CWA as a whole represents a whole lot of industries. We have media, we have telecom, call centers, public sector, airline workers, manufacturing, and AI is impacting all of us. So my biggest takeaway from it is that we are all in this together. We're all seeing similar impacts and all these different sectors can all learn from each other. I was really surprised when, I initially thought as I headed into this and started learning about AI that it would impact mainly lower skilled workers and lower income workers. And what I found is that that's not true at all. This transcends occupation, it transcends socioeconomic background, it transcends location, education level. This is something that is impacting all workers around the country. And I think that's why it's so important for us to have committees like the one that was created by CWA's national leadership so that we can share examples from across our industries. We can talk about what the impact is, and we can speak with one voice when it comes to suggestions about how to mitigate these impacts of AI.
Mike, thank you so much for your insights. We are not now going to turn over to our audience questions. I've seen that there have been many questions coming in, so thank you to our wonderful audience for participating. And again, thank you, Dan, Mike, Ben, for your excellent insights. And again, we are now moving over to the audience Q&A. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the Zoom's Q&A function. I will be drawing from these questions and posing them to our panelists. So the first question, let's shoot it over to Ben. One of our audience questions was, are you saying that the fears about AI are distracting from poor labor policy decisions?
That's a great question. I think the main point that I'd like to get across is that many of the problems associated with AI and other technological developments are rooted in decades of policies that unfairly tilt the playing field towards employers and away from workers, meaning workers do not have adequate labor law protections that allow them to organize and to have a voice at their workplace without fear of illegal or discriminatory punishment. I agree with a lot of what our distinguished panelists said today, that employers are using and will use AI or any technological tool as basically a way to pursue illegal or unscrupulous behavior under the guise of neutrality or productivity, whether it's racism or sexism in hiring and promotions, or whether it's monitoring and tracking workers to make work miserable or to punish labor organizing, or a whole host of other nasty stuff. But the problem here is not so much the technological tools in and of themselves, but how they're being used. So what would go a long way to reducing these kind of problems, among the other things that our panelists brought up, are making sure, for example, that regulators have enough information and access to hiring and promotion tools, auditing them and evaluating them, holding employers liable for any racial or discrimination using these tools, or making sure that we have binding and enforced laws that punish employers for violating labor laws, or making sure in general that workers have enough bargaining power at the negotiating table to insist that these tools that say track their work are actually used to facilitate promotions and increase wages and tenure rather than to punish or workers and exploit the power that employers can otherwise have over their employees.
Thank you, Ben. Another one of our audience questions. This one is for Dan. Our audience member said, I'm curious about the way that about 10 years ago, the availability of free or nearly free, easy to access translation tools such as Google Translate practically wiped out professional translators, even though in many cases the translation tools were really bad or inaccurate. They were free, fast, but inaccurate services, and they seemed to beat quality paid human labor. So how can economic policy, union activity, etc., help paid human workers compete against free but substandard tools?
Yeah, yeah. I think this has been a long-standing issue where employers going down low quality, low road path versus the high quality, high investment path in terms of the tools that they use. And I think that this is a central concern for unions and the members that they represent in their workplaces to ensure that high quality tools are used and that there's an investment in the quality of work that's being done. I think what I hear most from members that I work with, right, is how concerned they are with the ability to provide good service and to help customers and provide high quality. And so this is something that's central to them and their concerns. And so, this is definitely a place where unions and workers together advocating for a priority on investment in high quality tools that actually get the job done well can make a real difference and can help push for the tools we use that will result in higher quality.
Got it. Another question from our audience, also, regarding unions and language. Are there any examples of unions winning language that requires companies to allow independent auditors over the automated decision systems that they use? Open.
I'm not aware of any contract language on that off the top of my head. I'm not aware of, but I am aware of this being a central concern in policy and advocacy, that there's state, federal, and even city level bills focused on that issue of independent auditors and making sure that there's oversight of automated systems.
Yeah, and that is something that came up in our discussions on the CWA's AI committee. And we had started looking at language, but it's such a new part of this conversation. One of our recommendations as part of this committee was actually to create a permanent standing committee. And this is one of the issues that we're going to be looking at closely as those discussions get underway this winter.
Thank you. Another question from the audience, for anyone who feels, strongly about it. How will AI impact the healthcare industry?
I can jump in briefly here. So we do represent healthcare workers at CWA, and that was also a topic of our conversations in the AI committee. And we are seeing it encroaching into the healthcare realm. The one kind of saving grace there is right now is that some of the technology simply is not there yet. So, for example, AI is being used for things like evaluating CT scans, X-rays, MRIs, and looking for various things that were always in the realm of actual MDs and doctors. And there's been some scientific research, especially out of the UK and Europe, looking at the effectiveness of AI in doing things like identifying lung cancer versus an actual human being doing that. And the humans are still better at that task. If I was somebody, facing potentially that horrible diagnosis, at this point in time, I would want a real human being looking at my scans and not AI, because it simply is not as effective at this point. But again, that is active research going on in the medical community. These are technologies that are constantly evolving, and we could very soon see more and more AI being used in diagnostic purposes within the medical industry.
Thanks, Mike. One other question for, all of our panelists. Unfortunately, not everyone has a union to support their rights. So what would you recommend for the everyday employee that has to fight for their own rights?
I would say one of the most important things is to stay informed. Knowledge is always power. And so you need to understand what is happening in your industry and what is happening in your workplace. I would also say don't wait to start enhancing your skills. This technology is coming, and if we just stand in the road trying to block it, it's going to run us right over. So now is the time to start building up your skills so that you can adapt and you can use these to supplement your work. I think it's important to advocate for ethical AI usage as well. That can be done either in your local community, to your employer directly. And make sure you're talking to your fellow employees. Make sure you're sharing information about how these things are being used so that if something does come up, you as maybe a group of employees can work together to alleviate some of the impacts that the AI is happening, or be better able to advocate on your own behalf with your employer.
Also, you should seriously consider helping to organize and start a union in your workplace. But I want to emphasize one thing Mike said, which is about asking questions in your workplace, because I think it's the cases I've seen among our members is that a lot of times people are not even aware of when AI systems are in fact being used. Automated decisions are being made in their workplaces. So asking questions in the workplace about how decisions are made and what is going into them, I think could be very eye-opening and help you better understand the challenges that you're facing in your workplace.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Dan. Also, another question from our audience, and this is for all of our panelists. Do you all think that it would make sense to propose a job guarantee as a protection against potential job losses due to AI? What about universal basic income?
I do think that a better, sorry to jump in, I do think that a better social benefit system, a better welfare system in this country is enormously needed. The current system is completely inadequate for a large degree of the population and their families. I don't think AI or any of the technological tools that we've been talking about are going to be causing mass unemployment, certainly not on the scale of, like a recession, for example. And I think our efforts would be better concentrated on, providing a better welfare system like universal health insurance, subsidized childcare, better retirement system, because all those things will not only protect us from some of the harms of unscrupulous employers using AI in negative ways, but they'll also make this country a much more decent place to live.
Thank you, Ben. Another question from our audience. Can our panelists speak to how you all see AI impacting specific demographic groups, like the Latino, Asian, Black, and Indigenous workers in the U.S.?
Well, I could go back to to one of the biggest examples we've seen about AI's impact on a work group. Our call center work groups have been historically female dominated and have been historically been places of very diverse workplaces. And we have seen some of these new AI tools that listen to calls and grade call center agents on their friendliness and their pace of speaking. We have heard reports from our members of color about that those have had, they think, discriminatory effects, that the system will flag them more often than other people because of either an accent they might have or a particular style of speech they have. And so, those, I think it is an example that kind of points to the fact that our employers will tend to move forward with systems not totally thinking about those kinds of outcomes, and that workers often are more in tune with with possible bad outcomes and discriminatory outcomes that can come from these systems. And so, when workers have a chance to have input ahead of time, these kind of things can be foreseen. If as opposed to when employers barrel forward and on their own.
Yeah, we did talk about this quite a bit in our AI committee for CWA. And one of the things we heard from our union siblings who worked for places like Google was that the material that is being used to train the AI is not necessarily diverse. There's a lot of, for example, voice recordings being used that are from white men. And that when that's your sole basis for training how to recognize, say, tone of voice, now you have somebody from a different background who might have a slightly different speaking style, and it's flagging them constantly, saying you're not being friendly enough, you're not being empathetic enough for the person on the line. And so it comes back to, how is the AI being trained, and what can we do maybe from a policy level to ensure that we're using a diverse group of data and material to train the AI, making sure that we're being representative of all the diversity that we have in this country, instead of the materials just coming from one particular group.
Thank you. We are, short on time. I want to get to at least two more questions. So if you guys could answer super quickly. There's a lot of talk about how AI will impact workers. What benefits would we see if tech companies had their own unions?
Yeah, I mean, so CWA has been, has worked with lots of workers organizing in the tech industry. We've has had a neutrality agreement with Microsoft, and have been organizing tech workers there, and who've been working on getting to first contracts. Microsoft recently announced a more broad neutrality policy with unions in their work with the AFL. And we think there's just a lot of potential benefits for workers at these tech companies who are working on these systems being empowered to have a voice in their workplace, both as in the case of whistleblowers, but also Mike mentioned as part of the AI committee, when we talked to workers who work on these AI systems, we heard about the way that AI is used to manage them and surveil them, and how that they had deep concerns about what that meant, both for their working conditions, but also about the quality of the work that they're able to do. And so we see that workers having a voice at these tech employers that are developing these systems, it could have enormous benefits in terms of both the safety of these systems that they produce, and also the quality that they produce, that people are able to produce better systems because they've had a voice on the job.
Got it. And last question, because I know that we are running out of time, but I want to get to as many questions from our audience as possible. So, in navigating the changes brought about by AI, how important is collaboration between industry leaders, lawmakers, and labor organizations? And, to end on a positive note, are there successful examples of such collaborations that have resulted in positive outcomes for workers?
So I've got one example that comes from the media sector here in Michigan. And this was a collaborative effort between different public media stations in Michigan. Management was involved in our workplace. The union was involved, various workers all around the state. And something we did is we were looking at local government meetings around Michigan. So city council, planning commission, things like that. And, we have hundreds of cities all around the state. It's impossible to have reporters in all of these different locations. But we were able to take the live stream recordings of all of these different things from YouTube and from, local government channels, things like that, and actually have that data transcribed by artificial intelligence. It's able to tag topics and subjects that are being discussed at all these meetings. And then reporters are able to go through that and see, are there common threads that are cropping up across multiple governments all around the state? and use that as the basis for actual reporting work and journalistic work. So it's allowing us to cover more locations that we've been able to in the past. And we're able to actually provide those transcripts to our audiences so that they can see what is happening at their local government level. So I think that's just one example I have of where different groups have collaborated and the outcome has actually been quite positive for workers, for the organization itself, and perhaps most importantly for our audience and the general public.
Mike, Ben, Dan, we are going to leave it there. Thank you all so much. And thank you to our audience for joining us today. Next week, you'll receive an email with a link to a recording of this briefing and a Google Doc full of resources. If you got a starting now email and you clicked on a Zoom link, or in other words, if your name was event participant when you logged on instead of your actual name, you still need to register to be sure that we have your email to send you the recording and all the great resources. So make sure you sign up to get all the great tools that we discussed today and the recording of this webinar. We'll send reminders for future briefings and other resources and tools, so make sure you register. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and thanks again for being with us. Take care.